Welcome to Riding Counsel with Rich Jaffe, where the open road meets expert advice. I'm Richard Jaffe, an attorney and biking enthusiast, and this is the podcast where we dive into the world of motorcycling, safety, culture, charitable giving, and riding right. So, whether you're a seasoned rider or just getting started, let's talk bikes, the road, and everything in between. Let's ride! All right, hello everybody. I have a quick question for you out there. Let me ask you, if a friend hands you the keys to their motorcycle and says, hey, take it for a spin, do you know who's paying if you crash? Because in my world, that one ride has turned into lawsuits, uncovered medical bills, and friendships ending. So today, we're talking about the legal risks of test riding somebody else's bike and what riders never think about until it's too late. Hello, everybody. My name is Rich Jaffe. Thank you very much for joining us. Do me a favor, like, share, subscribe, and really get on there. I appreciate it. You know who I am if you've been listening. I am an attorney covering mostly personal injury cases, mostly motorcycle accident cases. I'm a podcaster and I am a motorcycle enthusiast. And I'm here with my good friend Million. How you doing, Million?
I am doing well. It is a pleasure to be here as always. And I just want to also remind the listeners out there that if you're on the YouTube channel, to click the notification bell so you don't miss your updates and drop comments. So let us know your favorite ride, or if this is speaking to you, we definitely want to hear it. And we're doing well. This is a real interesting area because it has a lot of nuance to it for a lot of reasons, as you just mentioned. So before we get into the specifics, how often does simple motorcycle test rides actually lead to legal trouble?
More than everybody thinks, okay? Because, people go in there and they're like, okay, I want to buy a used motorcycle. And they're buying a used motorcycle because either they don't have, enough money to, cover like this gigantic motorcycle from Harley Davidson. I mean, I've seen motorcycles go for like $100,000, but also because maybe they're new riders, or maybe they want to try a new kind of bike. They're going from a sport bike to a touring bike, or a touring bike to a sport bike, or something like that. And they'll see something maybe on Facebook that somebody's selling privately, or maybe they hear a friend that says, hey, why don't you consider my bike, or, like just borrow it or something like that. And it's unfortunate because those kind of people are unfamiliar with the bikes that they're getting on. So they're more prone to crashes. They're more prone to laying that bike down, and they're more prone to injuries and all kinds of problems. So it really does happen a lot. And nobody thinks about, okay, who's going to pay for this, and who's going to pay for the injuries, and who's going to pay for the damage. And, it may or may not be covered by insurance. And that's a real dangerous thing if you're uncovered.
A neighbor comes to me and says, Million, can I borrow your drill? Oh, no, sir. Can I take your truck? No, you may not. And I can't fathom the idea of someone actually say, hey, here's my motorcycle, take it for a spin, especially if it's like just a friend to friend thing. So why do people in these instances, why do they just assume that all insurance is just going to cover it when someone else rides their bike?
Maybe they have insurance already on their cars. Maybe they think they're invincible, like, I'm never going to crash. I know what I'm doing. I've been riding for 20 years, like famous lines, I've been riding so long. But, that kind of thing doesn't protect you. And even if you have a motorcycle and you're insured with that motorcycle on your own, that doesn't mean you're insured if you ride somebody else's. So the person selling the bike probably canceled their insurance because they're selling the bike and they may not be riding it. So the bike that you're riding, that the person is borrowing or test riding, doesn't have insurance, and your insurance might not cover. You really have to take a look at the policy. Nobody thinks to take a look at the policy. They get insurance for their own motorcycles before they test ride another motorcycle. And the most popular question I get, or I see online, is who has the cheapest insurance? And, look, some people, if you can't afford it, I understand, there's nothing wrong with that. But don't just get the cheapest insurance if you can afford more. Always get the most insurance that you can actually afford. And policies a lot of times are cheaper, let's say less expensive, if you want to use that, for a reason. And some of those reasons are, we don't cover test rides. We don't cover if you go on somebody else's bike. We don't cover medical expenses. We don't cover property damage. We don't cover. That's all they're going to say because you got this cheap insurance. You didn't pay for it. So you really have to know your policy, even if you have a policy on your own bike.
All right. So that's if you allow someone to use your bike. Now, from the rider side of things, what's the biggest misconception that riders have about insurance and liability during these test rides?
Well, the riders themselves think that they're covered by the person who is lending them the bike or letting them test ride the bike. And that's simply not true. And by the way, we're talking about like mostly private parties, okay? Because it's a whole different world if you go to somebody like a Harley Davidson dealer or a BMW dealer and you test ride one of their bikes. Because most of the time, that is covered by insurance. It's probably a regulation somewhere that they have to follow in your state. I know in New York it is, but if you're just going to a friend or something like that, and or somebody that you met on Facebook or Cycle Trader or one of these other outfits online where you're going to test ride the bike, it's not necessarily covered. I mean, they're selling it for a reason. And one big indicator is if that motorcycle that you're test riding doesn't have license plates on it, because usually you have to turn in the license plates in order to cancel the insurance. But even still, if it does have license plates on it, maybe that insurance on that motorcycle expired. So, you really have to be careful. You got to be careful about being covered whenever you ride.
All right, walk us through this. Let's say I borrow your bike and I crash it. Now, if I survive you coming after me, legally, what happens right after a crash involving a borrowed bike?
Well, in New York, okay, and it may vary by state, but if you crash a bike and somebody else is hurt, that person who is hurt can sue the owner of the motorcycle and the operator of the motorcycle. So the person driving the motorcycle, in this case, you would be sued, but also I would be sued because I am the owner. In New York, there's something known as a vicarious liability statute, and that's found at New York State Vehicle and Traffic Law, Section 388, which says that owners are responsible for anything the operators do. I guess it's supposed to stop people from giving the motorcycle or whatever car, whatever motorized vehicle to somebody who may not be as responsible as yourself. But the person who owns the motorcycle will be sued as well. So you're really exposing yourself if you loan it to a friend, at least in New York. Now, laws do vary by state, but many, many states have a statute exactly like this. So if you own a motorcycle, don't just think that it's not going to affect you if this person crashes and dies or hurts somebody else.
Hmm. Okay, so insurance is a very convoluted subject just in and of itself. Now, I'm assuming that in many cases across the board, probably that motorcycle insurance is structured differently than auto insurance. So, can you kind of walk us through the nuance of that?
Sure. Well, a lot of it is similar, but there are a couple of differences. At least here in New York, you are not covered by no fault if you're injured riding a motorcycle. So that means that if you don't have any coverage, like private health insurance coverage, then there's nobody to pay the bills except you. You can try to apply for Medicaid, but you might get denied there. So they're going to get the money one way or the other out of you. So that's a really big thing. Also, there's parts of the insurance that covers property damage. Now, this is a really tricky thing. When you're going for less expensive insurance on a motorcycle, a lot of times they will skimp out on things that really should be covered, like modifications to the motorcycle. So if you have things like floorboards or a nice seat or some, handlebars that are super nice that you put on as extra, that might not be covered. And, there's personal injury too. So it's supposed to be part of every policy, at least here in New York and, across the country, really, you can get that. But in places like Florida, you don't even need that kind of insurance to ride a motorcycle. It's really crazy. And if you do have that insurance, then it's very minimum. You can have limits of like $10,000. And if you hurt somebody and those injuries are serious, well, if it goes over that $10,000, they're going to hold you personally responsible.
Mhm. So, when one gets motorcycle insurance, do you have the option to add on like some kind of rider for a test rider person in maybe future considerations? Maybe you're going to sell it privately at the end of its run or whatever. Is that something you can add on, or do you can only list people specifically on policies? How do they handle that?
Okay, so there's different ways to handle this. Okay, so first of all, not every policy will have an exclusion for test riding a motorcycle, meaning that if you have your own motorcycle, a lot of times it will cover, but you really have to check the terms of the policy in order to be sure. Second of all, as an owner, if you're giving it out to somebody to test ride, well, if you're first of all, read your policy as and then you're also able to call the insurance company and say, look, I'm going to sell this motorcycle and what I want is event coverage. So when somebody comes and test rides the motorcycle, I want it for this particular purpose. So I don't want it to really cover me because I'm not really going to ride it anymore. I just want it for people who are going to test ride. You can actually save yourself some money if you do that. So that is an option.
Got it. Got it. Got it. I've heard the term as we were researching through this, the term permissive use. Can you tell me what that is?
Sure. So, what you have to be aware of is if you have a motorcycle and it's stolen, and then that person who stole the bike gets in an accident, gets in a wreck, you as the owner are not responsible for that. But it is your responsibility to prove that it was stolen. So, you have to report it to the police.
Okay.
And that is one thing of permissive use. That's one example of where the use is not permissive.
Okay.
Another kind of thing is work. So if you're using your motorcycle specifically for a work related activity, then your personal insurance is not going to cover that. You have to really, really be careful. So let's say you're out doing DoorDash or something like that on a delivery, your
Got it.
personal insurance is not going to cover that. You really have to get special insurance for the fact that you're working. So you really have to know what your insurance policy says
Mm.
and be understanding of all of the clauses in that. I'm happy to review anybody's insurance policy out there. So all you got to do is send it to me.
Yep.
It's free, free review. And it's a simple phone call. So you can always call me, email me, text me, leave me a comment below. I respond to all comments.
Okay. Another scenario. So party A, party B. Party A borrows B's bike. They take it, they crash. If both the owner and the rider both have insurance, whose policy's kicking in first?
The motorcycle policy that covers first is the one that travels with the motorcycle, meaning that it's the person who owns the motorcycle, that policy will cover first. If
Oh,
and only if the person was using it permissively that was driving the motorcycle, that insurance can actually stack on top of the first policy. So in New York, you sue the owner and the operator, and each, if they have, you can hold them individually responsible, but they're also what's known as jointly and severally liable, meaning that you can sue the owner and sue the driver. And if one is only like 1% responsible and the other one 99% responsible, you could still get all the money from the person who's even 1% responsible. They in turn have to get the money from the person who's 99% responsible. So it gets a little convoluted,
yeah.
but those two policies will stack. Primary insurance is the one that insures the actual motorcycle that was being driven.
All right, let's go the other direction now. Let's say that in this case, neither party's insurance has a consideration for the situation. Maybe even somebody doesn't have insurance. Who's paying?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, hopefully, if they hurt somebody, that person who is hurt has something known as uninsured motorist provisions. So when you buy motor vehicle insurance, you can get very high limits of uninsured motorists in case something crazy like that happens. And believe it or not, it does happen a lot.
Sure, yeah.
You can also get something known as underinsurance. So, underinsurance covers when you're hurt by a motor vehicle with somebody who doesn't have a lot of insurance, maybe the bare minimum. So, if you have an injury that's worth, say, $1 million, but the person who hit you is only insured up to 25,000, you first get the $25,000 from the person who hit you, and then you can go to your own insurance policy and get that underinsurance policy to kick in some more money. That underinsurance policy will then take on the job of going after the person who was actually responsible for the accident. So it saves you a lot of work. It's a very, very
Um,
good piece of protection. If you're riding that motorcycle and there's no insurance, then nobody's paying. Nobody's paying. So you are SOL. You are smack out of luck, let's say. You're smack
I
out of luck.
gotcha.
So I'm hoping that you have your own health insurance. And if you don't have your own health insurance, well, if you don't have Medicaid or something like that, then it's going to be a real big problem for you because you can go bankrupt and it's a really bad situation.
Maybe stay away from bikes for a little bit until you get one of
Right,
these solved,
get some health insurance. You should
maybe
always have health insurance coverage anyway, at
something,
least for
something.
catastrophic events, It's crazy.
All right, so in that, you're the test rider crashes and gets injured. How will medical coverage work in that situation?
So, if there is medical there in New York, at least, there's no fault coverage, meaning that the motorcycle rider is not going to get paid no fault benefits from the insurance company for the motorcycle. But there is something known as med pay coverage, which is a little different, but will still help a little bit in covering all the medical bills if you are hurt. Now, the second thing is that you can also go to your health insurance. So that would be the second layer. Health insurance will pay whatever they pay, assuming that, it's in network or maybe you have out of network benefits. And if all else fails, then if you're not responsible for the accident and you have somebody else to sue, then the person who you sue can actually pay for those medical bills. But, you really have to work hard to get that money.
Mm. All right, so shifting a little to the liability end of things, excuse me. A bike owner can still be sued even if they weren't on the bike at the time. There's provision for that, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then how do the courts then sort of decide who's responsible when both maybe the owner and test rider share some fault equally? Okay. How are courts looking at this?
So this is another really tricky thing because an owner can be responsible for the happening of an accident when the bike is broken somehow or has some sort of mechanical problem
Mhm.
and then says, yeah, go ahead, go test ride the bike, and the test rider has absolutely no idea that that actually happened, that there's problems with the bike and that caused the accident. So you can have somebody who is hurt suing the owner and the operator of the bike. Then you can have the operator suing the owner because the owner didn't tell him, and then you can try to have the owner suing the operator because, they're actually at fault. So you have everybody pointing the finger at everybody else, and it really does get messy. It has to do with counterclaims, cross claims, and it's really like a bowl of spaghetti. You can't really untangle it all.
Oh my
And
goodness.
all I got to say is have the right insurance so this doesn't happen to you. Otherwise, you'll be entangled for this kind of thing in the courts for years and years, and it won't go away.
Oh man. It's like a saxophone in a sleeping bag. I just
I'm
can't
telling
figure
you,
this
man,
one out, man.
it's horrible.
Another term that came up as I was doing my show research today is negligent entrustment. Walk me through what that means and how that factors in this part.
So if you're the owner of a motorcycle and you're giving it out for a test ride, let's say, or you want to let a friend borrow it, if you do so and you have knowledge, or you should have had knowledge that the person who is riding your motorcycle was really unfit somehow to ride that motorcycle. Maybe they've been in a ton of crashes, maybe they have a ton of speeding tickets, maybe they have one arm or one leg and they're really not supposed to be riding it, maybe they have really bad eyesight that hasn't been corrected, whatever have you.
Drinking, drugs as well.
Right, if they're drunk and they say, "Let me go borrow your motorcycle," and you hand them the keys, well, you could be sued for that negligent entrustment. So that's over and above
Got it.
that which the operator has done. So, you're really talking about a lot of exposure to a lot of liability, but it certainly is a cause of action that's very serious. So don't go lending your motorcycle out to somebody who really shouldn't have it. So if somebody comes to your house and they want to test ride your motorcycle and say, "Look, I got cash in hand, I want to buy it," one of your first questions should be, show me your license that you are licensed to ride motorcycles in this state.
Mm.
If they're not licensed to ride motorcycles, then and you give them the keys, then that's negligent entrustment. you know, I mean, that's just silly and dumb. So, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes.
All right, let's drill into that a little bit. So let's say someone finished their little course at the Harley dealership where they're putting around. I think it's so neat when they do that. And you get your motorcycle endorsement, you're ready to rock here, and you decide to go test drive some guys like Hayabusa crotch rocket thing ready to go like 300 miles an hour, which you're
Yeah,
clearly not ready for.
right.
I would assume that the rider's experience level is going to factor into some of this, and who gets held liable in a case like that? You're
Yeah,
clearly not
100%.
ready to ride that motorcycle.
Sure. I mean, if you're selling your motorcycle, that's another good question. How long you been riding motorcycles? What kind of motorcycle do you have? Where did you learn? All those kinds of questions before somebody gets on your bike. Because the failure to ask those kinds of questions could add up to negligent entrustment. And also, if even if it's not negligent entrustment, you're still going to be held liable based upon those vicarious law statutes I was talking about before for the negligence of the operator. So, really, you got to be careful if you're letting people test ride your motorcycle. I don't care if you have cash in hand or not. For the motorcycle before they test ride it, it's a thing where you're going to get sued because you're the owner of the motorcycle. So, let's not expose ourselves, literally and figuratively. You're going to get caught with your pants down.
One way or another. Let's not do that.
Right.
So running with that, so someone has a valid motorcycle license. Does that provide any protection to the owner at that point as well if they do have the license?
A little bit. It's one step that, you can validate the fact that this person actually does know how to ride a motorcycle. But you really, as an owner, and before you give that test ride out, should ask the other questions. Okay, well, how long you been riding motorcycles? What kind of motorcycles have you been riding lately? And you have to ask a lot of background questions if you really want to prevent something like a negligent entrustment cause of action against you. And, even if it's not negligent entrustment, make sure the person's on the up and up because you don't want them going out with your motorcycle and having it come back to you.
Mm. Let's pivot over to dealerships versus private. So you were mentioning earlier that they have a different set of rules and circumstances. So how do dealership test rides differ from legally from private, like friend to friend kind of test rides?
So a lot of times what you'll see is when you're riding around in your car or your motorcycle, a vehicle will have dealer plates. It's commonly called dealer plates, and it's the license plate. Looks like a
Mm,
normal license plate, except on the bottom it says dealer. And these license plates are meant to be exchanged from car to car because state governments recognize that test rides have to happen, and cars are being registered then unregistered, and titles are being going back and forth. So in order for that motorcycle to be covered, they put a dealer plate on it, and once that dealer plate is put on and the test ride is happening, that person is covered by the insurance policy of the dealership. So at the very least, there's some coverage, right? There's something there, but how much is quite a different story. And still, if you're an operator of a motorcycle and you do something silly and stupid, well, you're going to be held responsible for your negligence if you hurt somebody or you crash the bike. So regardless of whether it's insured. So the insurance company will go after you to get their money back for the money that they paid, or the dealership will. So don't do anything stupid on test rides. No wheelies.
I'm assuming too that a dealership with even including the high value motorcycles are going to have crazy amounts of insurance for all kind of different scenarios. In this case, that would be my guess.
Yeah, yeah. Look, even if it's not being test ridden, there's insurance on the higher paid, the higher priced vehicles. Especially the Harleys that are costing $100,000. And I'm not kidding. There's Harleys out there that will cost you $100,000 and even more. So yeah, dealerships really want to be very careful about that stuff. So if somebody walks into the dealership, bumps into it or something like that, then it's covered. So there are layers of insurance, and you can get insured for almost any event.
Okay. Okay. Now we've had the dealers, we've had friend to friend. Here's my bike. You take it for a ride. Someone selling it privately, specifically in this case. A for sale test ride. Are we talking any like unique legal things, any gray areas, anything like that, as opposed to just letting a friend ride your bike? Like what what like little like nuances wouldn't we think about here?
Well, if somebody is selling a bike, and they're saying it's as is, that's one thing. But there's guarantees and warranties that may or may not pass with those. But if you sell it, if you're an owner and you're selling this as is, then that kind of says that there's no warranties, there's no guarantees that this bike is actually safe, or I'm not making any promises that I'm going to give you about this bike. So that's one big difference. And when you're letting somebody test ride, you're not even representing that it has insurance on there. I mean, there's really nothing there. But that gets into the whole assumption of the risk kind of thing where, somebody is test riding your bike. They have to know that there's a problem with the bike. And even if they know that there's a problem with the bike and they get on voluntarily and start riding around, well, that's on the operator. That's really the fault of the operator, the person who's test riding the bike. Otherwise, it's really the owner for not telling the operator that there was a problem with the bike. So that's another way that an owner of the bike can really be responsible on a test ride.
What a mess. From a pure legal perspective, just as far as the law is concerned, there's clearly got to be some provision for a permitted test ride. Do they actually have? I heard it something on the term of unauthorized use. Like, what would something like that be considered?
Well, in terms of insurance, you have to have coverage for test rides. We've already covered that, but also like an unauthorized use would be something to commit a crime. That would be bad,
Oh,
and you're not covered for that. So if you're going to rob a bank and thinking about using your motorcycle to do that, well, you're not going to be covered. Person can say, okay, I'm going to test ride your bike and really use it in a bank robbery instead. They're not going to be covered. If you use it for work and, there's other scenarios where it's not the normal use of a motorcycle. So if you're going to be drag racing, also another exception. So you're never going to be insured for something like that.
driving around that big metal sphere at the circus.
Right, right. Inside the cage, not going to be insured unless it's special. So don't test ride inside of a big ball cage.
With the traveling circus. So, but I'll bring it
Right.
back to you. Don't worry.
Yeah, no, not my monkeys, not my circus.
Exactly. When you're selling a bike to someone through, modern means, now we're talking online platforms, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist in some cases, or like eBay Motors. Do those platforms bring in any sort of special considerations? Can they be held to any account if something goes wrong or any liability change in those scenarios?
There is something known as the stream of commerce, and you're getting into like a product's liability kind of cause of action. And a lot of people have tried to hold people like eBay or Facebook responsible for something faulty about the actual motorcycle because they're part of the stream of commerce. But it really hasn't happened, and it's what they call it, a ministerial act or just a platform for putting it up. And they don't really make money off the sale. They make money off of the person who is actually selling the motorcycle. So, they have a bunch of arguments and a bunch of little clauses in their very fine print that protects them. Good idea to try to go for a deep pocket, but it hasn't worked. And as far as negligence goes, it's really not a negligence cause of action. It would be more like a product liability. It's a little different, a little different. Um, I don't know if we're going to have time. How about do you have any more questions? Maybe one more question I can squeeze in before we're going to have to wrap it up.
Well, something we always like to end with is that every rider, every owner out there, one simple legal rule you need to follow before handing over the keys. What are we talking?
You got to ride your ride, number one, but you also have to be insured, read your policy, and consult with somebody like me who actually knows what the hell they're talking about. So I'm happy to review an insurance policies, but always ask if that motorcycle is insured, and check it out. Check it out before you get on that bike, because if you get hurt, if something happens to somebody else, I don't want you all out there to pay the price for somebody else's negligence and, not even having insurance. Always confirm this stuff in writing, and just always assume that that bike that you're getting on as a test rider is uninsured. So make sure you have your own. But until that,
Ridingcounsel.com.
right. You can always find me. You can always find me at ridingcounsel.com, ridingcounsel.com. You can call me, you can text me, you can email me. You can drop a little message here on YouTube, for all you listeners out there. You can just punch it up when you get home, if you're in a car. ridingcounsel.com. All my information is there. My email address, my telephone number, everything else. But until the next time, we're going to hopefully talk about something that's going to interest you again on our next episode. But in the meantime, I want everybody to ride free and ride safe, and everybody do so legally. All right, everybody, you guys take care out there.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
day.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Riding Counsel with Richard Jaffe. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your fellow riders. Until next time, keep the rubber side down and ride safe.